Hi, welcome to China Unscripted. I'm your host, Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley John.
And I'm Matt Ganejda.
Today we have a very special guest joining us all the way from Bangkok, Elliott Zaagman. Elliott, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a bit about yourself.
Hey guys, well, I've probably spent about 10 years of my life altogether working in different ways in China. I've done a lot of different corporate training. I've started my own business there. I've done a lot of different PR and media consulting. But for the last year or two, I've done a lot of writing and journalism more. So I write for a Chinese blog. I have not been fully blocked in China yet, which is a good thing. And then I also
Congratulations.
I also do a lot of writing, particularly about Chinese tech, and also kind of how tech intersects with society. So I write for the outlet Technode, as well as Tech in Asia and Sup China as well.
Well, Elliott, I hear a lot of really good things about Chinese tech. We should all be buying Huawei and Zte.
Oh,
right?
yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I've actually done a lot of work on Huawei. It's an interesting company. I think that I don't really know what to think of it. I've looked at their corporate culture a lot, which I think is quite interesting. But it's really hard to know if they're just kind of like something to raise an eyebrow at, or if they're really as sketchy as everyone else, as the Christopher Wrays of the world seem to think that they are. Mm-hmm. And I really don't know. They probably range somewhere from kind of sketchy to super evil. I don't really know.
That's a lovely range.
Would you personally buy a Huawei phone?
No.
ZTE?
No.
Should I be saying ZTE?
No, I'm a Z guy. I'm American. So, and my last name starts with Z. So, I'm a Z.
Well, so one thing the Chinese Communist Party talks a lot about is this idea of cyber sovereignty. What does the party mean when it says cyber sovereignty?
Well, it's hard to know exactly because there is not 100% consensus, even within the CCP, about what cyber sovereignty exactly means, from what it seems to me. But we do know that there are some fundamental principles. One is that they would like to legitimize the Chinese internet and Chinese internet management on a global scale. So they would like to be seen as their model, having being seen as a way forward for other countries as well. And
what is their model?
Well, the firewall for one thing. So the Great Firewall. That's just a place to start. But then also kind of opinion management and public opinion management as well as surveillance in a lot of ways as well. But ultimately, I think that there are differing opinions within the party on exactly to what degree this kind of model of cyber sovereignty goes. Ultimately, where I think everyone can agree on is that they want to be able to govern the internet within their borders like they govern everything else within their borders, which is they do as they see fit, and they would like to establish those norms across at least within their sphere of influence. But it is not entirely clear exactly what that means, because they also because when you look at this idea of sovereignty, it is a country being able to kind of dictate how it manages its own internet. But also, if you have to look at how is each country going to manage their own internet? Well, they're probably under the Chinese kind of model of cyber sovereignty. They're probably going to use Chinese technology and Chinese systems, right? So, in a lot of those ways, they're really going to be using China. China will really be in control. So while they can say it's going to be, it is each country being able to have sovereign control. If a Chinese company is building all the infrastructure, if the country is heavily indebted to China, if Chinese influence and the Chinese military are propping up the country, it's not really sovereignty. It's kind of it's I don't know exactly what the right word would be, but sovereignty is not the right word. It is one that's heavily influenced by the Chinese Communist Party. So, but it should be said that while this is I think a vision of some people, I don't know if this is an explicit idea by everybody within the party, or just the idea of we want to be able to govern our own internet and let everyone else govern their own internets. So it's kind of like Huawei. It can be on a spectrum from kind of sketchy to really, really shady.
And Elliott, do you have a sense of how many other countries that China is building their internet infrastructure for?
Well, there's the difference of how many countries are following the Chinese model, and how many countries China is building their infrastructure. I mean, China is building the internet infrastructure for the UK, and China's has built the internet infrastructure for Australia. I mean, if you count Huawei in that way, as lying down
the recent deal with Huawei,
right, the fiber optic cable, right? But that when it comes to the model of the internet that Australia is using, they're using a more American model of internet. But if you look at, for example, Vietnam has adopted a cybersecurity law, or has enacted, that is very much modeled upon the Chinese model, that allows them to control what is on there, what is not on there, and also is it allows them to be able to if you're interested, if you're an advocate for human rights, it is something that is a very scary looking proposition, because if it works out for Vietnam, there are a lot of countries in the world that I think would want to apply a similar model. And in some ways, it does make some sense, because the American internet companies have not done a great job at being able to police their own platforms. So let's take a look at Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka right now still has a fairly open internet, but I think that they are a country to watch. So in this past spring, I believe, they had some kind of sectarian violence in the country, where there was basically fake news being spread about Muslim minority groups trying to kind of poison or sterilize the Buddhist majority. It was completely fake news, but it was circulated around on Facebook. And then it was kind of inciting violence. And when the Sri Lankan government requested that Facebook take down this fake news, Facebook did not have the people on staff who had the language knowledge to be able to manage that. So Sri Lanka ended up taking down Facebook for a while.
The entire thing.
Yeah, exactly. So what we see in this situation is we're also seeing it, I believe, in other places as well. From what I don't have the specific information, but if you look at what's happening here, how much money does Facebook make off of Sri Lanka? Not very much at all. And if you look at the kind of Facebook is one of the most productive companies per employee in the world.
That's not true. We are by far the most productive company.
If you're looking
the smallest number of people.
If you're looking at how much money they make per head, right? So they're very much.
I see. Okay, yes, Facebook wins.
They're very much understaffed in a lot of these developing nations, because they're making money off the U.S., they're making money off the European Union. They're not making a whole lot of money off Sri Lanka, off their ad revenue, right? So why staff it? Well, this is why you should staff it. And if they are not able to govern their platforms, you know what happens? Then they can say, well, look what China's doing to govern their platforms. Right? And
they're doing a very good job of governing their platforms.
Well,
lots of management.
Exactly, lots of management. So then what we're seeing here is really, I think that the kind of American-led internet model around the world is, I don't think that they see the threat that the Chinese model poses, and why it can be so appealing to so many of these developing countries. I mean, look at along the Belt and Road, particularly within Africa. So Africa is having first of all, you guys have reported on this about how closely involved China is politically and economically in Africa. China already built a lot of their infrastructure and is already working with them on security issues as well.
Well, I was going to ask this. What you're talking about, it's basically the Belt and Road Initiative. We've talked a lot about that on China Uncensored, how China uses infrastructure and development to trap poor countries into like these debt cycles. But lately, state-run media has been referring to the Belt and Road as the digital Silk Road. Exactly. So how does this how does technology play a role?
Well, once again, we can go from the most benign to the most kind of insidious, and it probably falls somewhere in between. We don't know quite yet, and I don't know if the CCP itself knows quite yet. So we could say, okay, well, they're going to lay fiber optic cable and develop high-tech economies across the Belt and Road. That's a great thing. And then there is the practicalities of it and how it will be used in security. That is a whole other story. I don't think that, to be fair, I don't think that China or the Chinese Communist Party has any plans of like, oh, we're going to, export authoritarianism. But I think that they want to protect their political alliances. They want to protect their investments, right? And in these countries, right, that will often add up to supporting authoritarianism.
Okay, so it seems to me that what is happening now is basically a choice between an American-led internet or a China-led internet. The history of the internet has mostly been led by the United States, which has made the decision to have the internet be free, open, relatively unmanaged. But now, China seems to be coming in and offering an alternative where it could be much more appealing to authoritarian regimes.
Yes.
And
go
ahead.
So let's take a look at, for example, let's just take a look at. Let's not give a specific country, but let's just look at a lot of African nations in general. So Africa.
Let's use Wakanda as just a name.
Wakanda, for example. So Africa is having a population boom. So a lot of young people. They're also having. They do not have the kind of infrastructure that is needed to be able to support this kind of population boom. And then if we look at traditional development models of, how did China develop, for example, where they took people from the rural areas, they took them to, blue collar jobs, to basically to increase that productivity and to give them living wages. A lot of those living wage jobs, by the time that these people who are in this population boom hit working age, a lot of those jobs are going to be gone because they'll be, taken by automation, AI. So what jobs are these people going to do? We don't really know, and there's so many people, and also these governments aren't particularly known for being capable, and they're far less capable than the Chinese Communist Party. So how are they going to control these groups of people? How are they going to stay in power? A Chinese type model, or the kind of, even if it's not a governance model, the kind of security apparatus that China has and the kind of technology that it uses in its state security is something that I think is very appealing. So if you look at Zimbabwe, for example, they're starting to contract with Chinese facial recognition AI companies to be able to employ it within state security. So, and as well as Huawei, we're also seeing this kind of smart city initiative, where in some areas it can be really positive, really productive. Fighting fires, getting paramedics out there, traffic control, but also we have to think about law enforcement. And in a lot of these countries, the police are not that different than criminal organizations. They're basically just one step above the mafia. So if we're giving these kind of poorly equipped and poorly trained kind of thuggish police forces the tools of an advanced state security apparatus, the potential to cause harm is really, really great. But on the other side, if you look at the demographics of the entire African continent, the potential for instability is also really high. And that could cause even more damage. So what kind of the Chinese cybersecurity model applied to African states, the potential there is scary, but also the potential without it is scary as well.
That's very interesting. Go ahead.
Well, so you're saying that a lot of African nations aren't going to have the ability to ensure high employment, and so instead of trying to fix the problems that are blocking people from having good jobs, they're just like, well, let's just have a security apparatus to stop the protests that will come from the inevitable high unemployment, and then use these Chinese technology and Chinese methodology to build up police forces and security forces to quell the unrest.
Yeah, exactly. Or to be able to control the, to censor the internet, to be able to track dissidents. All of these things are possible, and China does this right now. So, yeah, we have to wait and see, but it is something that seems to be that we're not the only ones looking at this. It seems to be growing in popularity as a model for other developing nations to follow.
So what is the difference between the choice of an American-led internet versus a Chinese-led internet?
Okay, well that's very interesting. Well, one is having think about what you enjoy about a free and open internet.
Cats.
I mean, what was that?
Cats.
Especially cats on Roombas.
Yes,
Cats on
exactly.
Roombas.
Yes, exactly. Cats, Roombas, pornography.
Not those three together.
Yo, yeah.
China uncensored, of course. All of
Good answer.
all that good stuff. No, I mean, but we have. It's basically it's how much we're managing it and what we're managing it for. Now, I think if you look at the way, for example, YouTube algorithm works, is that it sees what you like to watch, and then it keeps feeding you more of it. And in some ways, it makes it more extreme. And if we're looking at what's happening with Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, is that we're seeing kind of the problems that it's causing for Western democracies at the moment. And what China says is, okay, instead of nudging that, let's just kind of take complete control over it, so that we're in control of what everyone's saying, and we're monitoring it as well. So we're both taking the information and sending it out. And I think that's a particularly worrisome thing as well. If you're thinking about kind of freedom of thought and freedom of and kind of kind of democratic people-led society. So let's take a look at, for example, Jinru Toutiao, the kind of number one news app in China, right? So Jinru Toutiao is used. I think the average user uses it over an hour a day. It's a news aggregation app, and what it does is it has pretty sophisticated machine learning, where it'll take content that is produced by, some of it is just normal people, some of it is real news outlets or legitimate news outlets, as legitimate as it is in China.
Like Xinhua, yeah.
Right, and then they target it based on what the user likes to consume. Right now, it started off just about 2 years ago as being a very kind of democratized platform where anybody could create just about anything, and that would find a way to its audience. Very similar to the way that YouTube is. Now, what's happened since 2017 is that the platform in 2016, 2017 basically just blew up. I mean, its valuation, the ByteDance, which is the company that's in charge of it, their valuation went from like a 1 or 2 billion to now it's like 75 billion. So something clearly happened where the government officials or the Chinese Communist Party had said, okay, well, we want to go into AI. Oh, this is an AI superstar, and they kind of designated them as being one of kind of China's champions, like AI and tech champions, and money flew in and they kind of blew up in popularity. But once that happened, you saw the platform change. So one thing that they did is they cut down a lot on what kind of content people could create. The second thing that they did is that they got rid of their Shehui kind of channel, which is like their society channel, which was a lot of kind of like pop culture, stuff like that. And they replaced it with a Xin Shidai, a new era, which is which is all Xi Jinping's face everywhere. And imagine what I think if you're the Chinese Communist Party, if you're the propaganda office, what kind of potential can that kind of platform offer you? You can say, okay, well, let's say Shelley likes the color red. She really likes cats, and Shelley has a 2-year-old niece that she really loves. We know she's got a lot of photos with a 2-year-old niece, right? And then she gets pictures and stories of Xi Jinping wearing a red tie with cats and talking to small girls.
Are there photos of Xi Jinping with cats?
I would love those photos. It's exactly.
But
wow.
What they can do there, is Chinese. Is the propaganda state media apparatus has been very, very clumsy, in that they have yes, exactly, as you guys have reported on. So they haven't done a great job of kind of being able to connect and target to 1.4 billion people. They're trying to go to the median of a very, very diverse country. But with something like Toutiao, they can, if they can use that kind of machine learning, they can really target their ads, or really target their message, just the way that any other marketing company does. I mean, it's not any different than any other advertiser, except that they control so much more of the information and have so much more power over the people. So they're really using kind of the same kind of tactics and kind of ad targeting that and content targeting that Facebook might or YouTube might, but they're the Chinese Communist Party.
So instead of delivering ads, they're delivering propaganda.
Basically, and the degree to which the sophistication is at this point is probably still not great, but I think it's something to keep an eye out for. I mean, they're basically commandeering these platforms so that if you go to them, it is not. The reason why these platforms are popular is that they would give you with tailored news and tailored content. Now it's less and less content and more propaganda. As over the last year or two, especially, the propaganda machine has been turned up, and also I think that in the last few years, the party has become more aware of what it can do with its tech companies when it comes to getting their message out.
So, 今日头条, its relationship with the propaganda department is what?
To be honest, I think that when you look at the different tech companies, I think that Toutiao is a little shakier. I don't know if it seems as though the party doesn't have the same degree of trust in them as they would in a company like Tencent. So, because they're independent, I think what we've seen with a lot of these companies is that for a lot of different reasons, one of which being that is kind of the trust of the party state, is that Alibaba and Tencent have kind of taken over the Chinese internet. And part of it is that they have really solid platforms, but other aspects are that they've done a much better job of partnering with the government and kind of earning the trust of the Communist Party. So if you look at Tencent, for example, like WeChat, its success has come from a lot of these abilities to really partner with the government, to be able to pay your phone bill via WeChat, to be able to pay your utilities via WeChat, to be able to, there's a new developments seemingly every day. That doesn't come out of nowhere. That comes from having very, very good government ties, and from the party seeing that these platforms are tools for governance and tools for surveillance, tools for all sorts of things, good and bad.
It's the convenience that gets us every time.
Yeah, but I think it also but the convenience, though, the productivity stuff does deserve credit. What they can do, for example, in areas like healthcare, I think is really impressive. If you have everyone's healthcare data, you combine that with AI, you can predict whether or not someone has cancer, but you can also predict whether or not they're a dissident. So it's a double-sided
potato, yes.
Right, exactly. So
and then it can give the dissident the healthcare recommendation that you probably need a suicide pill.
I was going to say,
cancer.
If they find a person who has a lot of injuries from being physically beaten, then you can assume that they are a dissident.
Good point.
Yeah, exactly. So so it is at the same time. I find myself as somebody who is working kind of on both sides, both kind of looking at it from an outsider's perspective and an insider's perspective, seeing, really there is some, real positive potential, but then also, the more that you know about kind of the dark side of what they actually do, if you're on the wrong side of it, it's also really scary. And it's really hard as somebody in my position to try to kind of balance those two, because I think so. It's almost like you have to choose. Like, do you go where the route that you folks did, which is where you say, okay, well we are if we can't get a Chinese visa, that's okay, because we've decided that we're going to take this stance, or other people that are just complete ass kissers and just following the party line. I think people should be able to exist on both sides, and I think it's a shame if you can't, at least the way that I see it, because I think that unless you can, there are people that can kind of be voices on either that can kind of go back and forth, that I think that it allows the system to kind of be vulnerable to its worst excesses. It's the people who, who are, for example, doing business, who are foreign business people in China, who will say like, oh, this is really f***ed up, who actually put some pressure on the party to stop them. But it's also the
Does that ever happen?
To some extent. I think that's a good question. I don't think it happens as much as it needs to. But if historically you see that when China has blocked itself off more, like it did from 1949 to the late 70s, even worse things happened. So it's hard. It is kind of it's a tricky moral situation to be in, I think. And I have this conversation quite a bit, especially with when you look at this tech at tech, and you see how tech is being used, particularly in surveillance and detention and these re-education camps in Xinjiang. It's really, you have to ask yourself those questions of how much do you want to be involved in the system anymore? How much? It's like the Trump White House, Like, can somebody, work in the Trump White House and be kind of the sane voice of reason? I don't know.
I think that's a debate that's been going on among China watchers and academics that's come out in the last few months about like human rights and how do you need to say things about Xinjiang or other human rights issues, or is it complicity if you don't?
Yeah.
Or if you're afraid of not getting a visa, things like that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and one thing that I've done, I'm in a situation where I can live in Bangkok. I can still do my work, and if I can't do work with China anymore, it's fine. I'm in a situation where that's okay, where I feel comfortable doing this. But also, it's not about me as much. I'm also worried about, for example, my publishers within China, and because you'll notice that when you follow other kind of journalists who have covered China stories, they very often will let the journalist go. Maybe they won't get a visa, but it's the Chinese people who've supported them and who've helped them that are the ones who really are the ones who get hurt, and that's another thing that concerns me as well.
But that's been happening for a long time. Like the person that Yahoo gave up was a Chinese news assistant.
Right, Shatao.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, even before then, I was reading this book, what is it called? Imperial Twilight. I forgot the name of the author, but it's about
a sequel to the Twilight series, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about the Qianlong Emperor, and he falls in love with a werewolf. And
this sounds like a hit.
Yeah, you got me.
Yeah, exactly. But it's about kind of the run up to the Opium War. So the mid to late Qing dynasty, and these traders that were down in Canton, mostly British traders, and one of them was this guy who he had been there from a very, very young age, from the time he was a child. He's a British guy. And he kind of was raised in kind of the port city, and he learned how to speak Chinese. And they got to this point where he was a young adult, like in his 20s at this point, and the government official who was in charge of the Canton port was really corrupt, and the British traders had wanted to use other ports because he was so corrupt, and the emperor didn't let them. So they said, okay, well, let's take this guy, let's sail him up to Beijing, and let's have him request an audience with the emperor to tell him about this corruption. So he ends up doing it, and he gets there successfully. He pays off this huge bribe at the Tianjin port, gets an audience with the Qianlong emperor, and he tells him about what's happening. And the emperor at that time, he's really happy to learn about corruption in the far-flung provinces, right? And so he ends up sacking the official, the corrupt official down in Canton, and he sends this British guy back to the UK. And then what he does is he says, arrest his Chinese teacher. Because how does this person have good enough Chinese to request an audience with the emperor? So he decapitates the guy's Chinese teacher.
Whoa.
Right?
So I think the lesson is never teach anyone Chinese.
Exactly. No, but I think that is very much, I think that when it comes to a foreigner, the question is, well, do they have the right to, or is it there within their jurisdiction to really punish the foreigner? But it is within their jurisdiction to really punish the Chinese person who has helped them.
Oh yeah.
So to me, that is something that I think about far more. I'm not worried so much about like my own safety, or a lot of other journalists I talk to aren't really that concerned about that. But you have to think about what's going to happen to the people that you care about.
That's actually how they get you a lot. Like even with people we've talked about who are overseas Chinese, don't talk about democracy, or your parents or your family in China are going to suffer the consequences.
I do think that one of the things that I've done is I write a lot for Chinese outlets and they translate to Chinese, and I write a lot of stuff that's kind of my own opinion that has to deal with a lot of with issues of kind of not necessarily directly human rights, but about like the issues of corruption or issues of management, so these things that are not necessarily directly related to rights, but they do have things to do with how you treat other people or how you manage perception abroad, and I find that I think that a lot of Chinese people do really respect a well-reasoned opinion, and that might touch on some of these things. You just have to phrase it differently. So something like, instead of saying I believe in human rights, right? Of course I believe in human rights. You can't say that, but which is bullshit. I mean, but you can say, but what is human rights? Human rights is valuing the life of another human being just because they're alive, right? Now, if I tell another Chinese person, you should value the life of that person because they're alive and because they're another person, right? That's okay, right? So you don't have to necessarily say human rights, but you can articulate, I think, the same concept in a way that is acceptable.
This seems like a censorship evasion technique.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And a lot of the people who I work with are doing some kind of censorship evasion, and that's one thing that's been really interesting working, and kind of being a columnist for Chinese outlets. Both sometimes I write for state media even, and then I write for independent media as well, and kind of learning, okay, well, how can you talk about this topic? So for example, with state media, how do they figure out how to report, that they're allowed to report on what topic? Well, one thing is, they need another state media to report on it first. So
preferably one of the big ones, right?
Right.
Like if People's Daily or Xinhua says something, it's okay.
Yes, but you can also use, for example, Global Times. But Global Times.
Love Global Times.
Oh, I know, Chris, it's your favorite. But Global Times writes about it so nationalistically. They can say but they'll still cover the same topic, right? So if Global Times covers it, even if they cover it in a really rah-rah, like almost fascistly nationalistic tone, that if you are another Chinese media outlet, you can report on it in another way. And because Global Times has been given the green light, you can kind of go in behind them and use them as some kind of cover so that there's at least plausible deniability. So that, maybe your article might get blocked, but at least your website won't get shut down.
Oh, God. It's like, I feel like if you know Chinese people who are from mainland China, like even my own family, like this has such an effect on how people think.
Oh, yeah.
Like the feeling that you always have to kind of like keep an eye out to like see like what's okay or not. And like there are all these different ways of reading tea leaves, more or less, or like trying to figure out like what's safe, what's not. It really kind of affects how you think about things. And everything is very like subtle and undercurrents and like roundabout in like a way that, then you come to a place like the US and it's a culture shock completely.
Yeah.
So wouldn't it be great to export that model around the world?
Yes, exactly. No, but I think, Chris, you're getting to a very good point there, is that China says that they don't want to export their model. And in some ways, I really don't think that they do. I don't think that they have this goal to export, socialism with Chinese characteristics, because it's socialism with Chinese characteristics, right? It is, even the Chinese Communist Party believes it's something that is unique to them. However, if you look at just the pragmatic, like just the benefits of it, right? They want, like the friends that they make abroad are usually the more authoritarian regimes. Their companies are the ones that have the expertise in surveillance, in censorship, right? That's what they do better than anyone else. So they need to keep their buddies in power. They need their companies to make money. They need to protect their investments in those countries. So I think that is, I think, where more of the risk lies when it comes to looking at kind of the Chinese model going abroad, is that they might not intend to, from this kind, like I don't think that they're, what is it, the guy from Inspector Gadget with the cat, what's his name?
Oh my God.
Inspector Gadget. His
No.
name is-
Dr. Claw.
Dr.
Dr.
Claw.
Claw.
Yeah, I
Dr.
couldn't remember.
Claw.
Oh my God.
So
I was embarrassed. I don't remember that.
I don't think I think we give them too much credit when we think that they're like, this kind of, mustache twirling, Dr. Claw bad guy.
We never see his face. You don't know if he has a mustache.
Right. Well, his face is Xi Jinping. We know that.
Oh, now
Yeah,
you're
the cat.
you're banned in
Dr.
China.
Claw had a cat. Xi Jinping, there's those photos of cats that you've told me exist. It all makes sense.
I think those photos are probably photoshopped, Chris.
Oh.
Chinese officials never Photoshop stuff, guys.
Right.
Go look up that episode of China Censored.
Wait, so what were we talking about?
Cats.
Inspector
About
Gadget.
No,
Inspector
Qianlong
Gadget,
and werewolves, I think.
And exactly, all that stuff. So yeah. So I think that even if they don't, it's like America, for a long time said that they would never engage in imperialism, right? And then the practical realities of global power kind of forced them to engage in imperialism. And I think that, China says they don't want to export their model. I think that the practical realities of trying to maintain a system of global alliances, to maintain their investments overseas, I think that is a serious risk, that they may be exporting authoritarianism, because it just is what needs to happen in order for them to ensure their other interests.
I actually have a question about the Chinese internet itself. Like,
Sure.
We're coming about 20 years, more or less, of the Great Firewall, and this type of like internet ecosystem, like intranet ecosystem-ish thing that the Chinese Communist Party has developed. And what I think thing that you said was interesting about Totai about it being not as trusted as some of the established media brands, but they still have like this like new era section, right, on their app now and all this stuff. Like, how do you see like the Chinese censorship model like changing? Is it becoming more sophisticated now? How is it working with people and how they're using the internet?
Well, it's becoming more, it's becoming more sophisticated and it's becoming more complex. So it is, I think that one of the big shifts that we're seeing is it's going from controlling what people see to being a two-way thing. And the more that AI gets involved, the more it creates a feedback loop. So it's both collecting data and giving out content, right? So they can suggest what people see. They can also surveil. They can, you think about it, at least in a lot of the people that I speak to, what they have in their mind is like, I can't, if I send a message to my friend and I say the word human rights, that'll get me in trouble. Not necessarily, but think about what they can do with all the big data. Once they see, okay, well, more and more people are talking about this topic. Okay, well, now we know that this topic has to be pushed to the side. They can very much control public opinion in ways that they couldn't before. They might not be able to, control. They might not be able to succeed at governance. She might not succeed at all of his initiatives, but he can definitely, as the technology gets more sophisticated, he can definitely make everybody in China love him.
Well, who doesn't?
and yeah, we all love him, right? Except for that girl who put the ink on his face. And
well,
then
she's gone now, so we don't have to worry about her anymore.
Right. But yeah, it's it has that potential, and I think we're starting to see some of it play out. But at the same time, I think it's important to remember that the technology itself is scary. So if we see what's happening, the way that YouTube's algorithms have been organized and designed is that they're basically pushing people to extremes. And that's one reason why we get people like Trump in office. Now, is Trump within the American system preferable to dictator for life Xi Jinping in the Chinese system? Yes, but it's also scary, and especially in like developing countries, it can cause real damage. So the way that I like to look at it, and the way my message is basically, there's not that much that I can do about the Chinese system, but what I can do is say like that our American tech companies need to up their game. Because if we don't have a way to have a better solution for the free and open internet, then the closed internet will take its place.
I was going
and
to.
that's the future I don't want to see.
Yeah, Elliot, I don't know if you have to worry about our tech companies upping their game. I mean, Google seems to be really upping their game by planning to go to China.
Oh yeah. Well, they're. I guess
Actually,
it's good for their investors.
Yeah, well, I want to interrupt that because this is something I read in an article you wrote, which I thought was pretty makes a lot of sense. Google isn't planning to return to China. You wrote Google has been returning to China.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, they never fully left. They've always had a presence there, and they've had a sales office there. Basically, where if a Chinese company wants to advertise, Facebook as well, where if the Chinese companies wants to advertise on the platform, they can do it through their Chinese office. But yeah, they opened an AI office in Beijing. They opened another office in Shenzhen. They're making deal after deal after deal with Tencent. They invested in Jingdong, JD.com. And yeah, they're also. I mean, I work a lot in HR and have a lot of HR in a lot of HR circles and WeChat groups, and they've been recruiting heavily since last year in in China. They're back.
After the CEO met with top officials.
The big turning point seems to have been at the Wuzhen World Internet Conference.
Oh yeah.
Where it seems that was when the Google folks met with some higher ups, but I don't know exactly. I don't know the details. But that was a turning point where they seem to have gotten some green lights for some further deals, because the next month they announced a partnership with Tencent for some patent deals. They opened up their office in Shenzhen, and they've been doing step by step going further this year. So it definitely seems like they're partnering with Tencent, because all of their deals have been within Team Tencent, which makes a lot of sense. Because if you look at the way that foreign firms have entered China in the past, it has almost always been, at least for the large firms, through a joint venture. And that seems to be how the Chinese Communist Party prefers it. For a long time, all joint ventures had to be 51% Chinese partner owned. So it seems like if you're Google, if you're Facebook, that some sort of partnership where kind of you're under the wing of a Chinese tech giant is...
Well, if you ask me, Google partnering up with Tencent, that makes no sense. That's pretty good, thank you.
That's good.
Thank you. But, don't you see hasn't there been a history of a lot of risks of these Western companies partnering up with these Chinese companies, like a loss of intellectual property, a lot of, what do you think about it?
Well, there's a few things here. So if we're looking at intellectual property, they'll probably lose it, but they'll also probably gain it, because China, if Google wants to, Google's a leader in AI, and Google, there are a lot of really good AI engineers in China, and if Google opens up an office there, they can, benefit from Chinese talent. So they're also taking some of that as well. But yeah, I'm sure they're going to be giving up a lot of IP. I think that there's going to be a significant amount of pressure from the Chinese Communist Party for Google to go along with their demands. Certainly. Now, I think censorship is just the tip of the iceberg. China has been pushing, or the Communist Party has been pushing civil-military integration very much over the last few years,
really?
particularly with their tech firms. So if you are, for example, an AI firm, look at, for example, SenseTime, which is a facial recognition AI firm. They've exploded in valuation largely because of their ability, or their contracts with Chinese public security. So being able to use facial recognition, for policing, and so it's the same thing with I know that earlier this year, Google employees had basically they protested a project that Google had agreed to work with the U.S. military for some AI-enabled weapons. Now, think about, so Google employees said, no, we don't want Google to do this, so Google backed out. Would that ever work in China? No way.
Well, here's the question. Mm-hmm. Because there has been some blowback now because of that Intercept article that leaked the fact that they were developing this Android app search engine. And now Google employees in the headquarters are upset. But from what you're saying, will that have any effect if they're already so invested in going back into China or expanding their presence in China?
That's a good question. I don't know. But in some ways, I think it might. I think that there are some benefits because this kind of stuff gets brought up. That Google employees as Google tries to, as Google goes deeper into China, more people, the Chinese internet is in the news more, and both in China and outside of China. And I think that both Beijing and Silicon Valley are echo chambers when it comes to ideology. And obviously, I prefer the Silicon Valley-based internet, but I do think that it's important for a little bit of pushback to cause some compromise here, to provide some sort of checks and balances. And that's at least the way that I look at it as an optimist about this, because there's only so much that I can do. But I do think that having Google involved in China is not entirely a bad thing, because it does offer more of a window into the Chinese internet for those outside of China, so that they can know, okay, well, this is actually what's happening there. Google has to be more transparent. They have to report, and if they don't, then The Intercept will. And I think that there is a positive side to that. So yeah, I don't know exactly how to think about Google in China, but I think that it is not entirely negative from the perspective of advocates of an open internet.
I do think that's pretty optimistic. I guess I don't have a lot of confidence in how Silicon Valley interacts with China, being the fact that Cisco helped basically built the firewall.
Yeah.
So there's not a great history there.
No, I don't. If I were Google, I think Google is playing with fire, and I am surprised how. I mean, both like Zuckerberg as well. Like, I don't get. I mean, I get it from
money.
Like, China has the biggest, this was 700 million internet users. I get that, but yeah, I mean, like, there are so many companies that get burned by China, as Google has in the past. But also, I mean, if you look at these companies right now, they're kind of at the end of their big growth spurts. Their stock has been on a tear for the last 5 years. They've been booming, but their growth seems to be slowing, both for Google and Facebook, right? Facebook, but they dropped 20% the other week, and because they're not going to be able to bring in the same revenues and they have the same growth that they had before. One way to handle that is to get into China, and that can give them another growth engine. And then if you're, for example, Tencent or Alibaba, who seems to be at least flirting with Facebook, if they want a door to the outside world, because China's economy is, I think, in much worse shape than most people realize. Their demographic, they're in the middle of on the verge of a demographic crisis where things are not looking very good for them for the long-term future. So that if you are a tech firm and all of your eggs are in the China basket, that's not a very good situation to be in. You need to diversify away from China. So if you're Tencent and all of your data, all of your business is in China, you need to find a way to get out. How do you get out? Well, partnering with a company like Google would be very helpful as well.
So you think we'll see Tencent kind of using that to bring their products into the West?
I think it's a possibility, and I think that if you look at so Tencent is heavily invested in Jingdong, in JD, which is for listeners who don't know, it's the second biggest e-commerce platform in China, and they also have a lot of very strong e-commerce infrastructure in China, and they're very good at operations, and so Liu Changdong, who is the head of Jingdong, he's the CEO and founder. He's kind of known as kind of like he is the top lieutenant to Ma Huateng at Tencent. So they're kind of seen. He's kind of like he's known as a very like a powerful guy, but under like kind of Team Tencent, quote unquote. Tencent's invested, and then also Google and Walmart both invested in JD. So I think what they're looking at is, as JD goes on their global expansion, having some kind of partnership with Walmart, who's trying to expand their e-commerce offerings, and Google, who has, who's looking for other growth areas and also has the data. I think that partnership has a lot of potential.
I guess Walmart should change its name to Great Walmart.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Oh, God, Chris.
I died on the inside a little bit.
But that didn't stop you.
Didn't stop me, no.
With all those kind of jokes, Chris, like I'm sure, if you die on the inside a little bit every time you make those jokes, I'm surprised you have anything left.
I take a lot of Chinese herbs to replenish my
Your vitality.
my vitality.
A whole lot of tiger penis, just tons of tiger penis.
Hey, don't knock until you try it. For everyone listening, I do not consume tiger penis.
Not until they sponsor us. Hello.
Oh, I mean, yeah, if Tiger Balm Tiger Penis wants to sponsor this podcast, all day, every day. Oh, well, I think we've hit a record low. And perhaps on that note, we should start wrapping up.
Sure.
I guess you have any final thoughts you want to share with us about the future of the internet under China or censorship or anything you think people should know about? Nice, vague, open-ended question.
Yeah, I think one way to look at it, I think it can get real. The debate and the conversation around all this stuff can get real out of hand really quick, both in how quickly we are to demonize kind of the Silicon Valley companies, and how quickly we are to write off everything about the Chinese internet as well. There's a lot. Google said don't do evil. There's a whole lot of evil in Silicon Valley and in China right now.
Well, that's why they got rid of that.
So there's right, exactly. But also, I think it's important for the world to be having a conversation of what we want internet governance to look like, and how we understand that balance between freedom and stability. Because if we aren't taking, an active role, if people who care about things like human rights and freedom aren't taking an active role in making sure that it is well managed, so that we can ensure kind of the free and open internet that we have, the China model is coming, and it is an easy alternative.
Versus 4chan.
Right, exactly. So you don't like 4chan, just block it entirely. I mean, if you are a dictator, the Chinese model offers an opportunity, and if we can't show that the free and open internet is an improved, worthwhile, productive platform, I guess, platform, network, whatever, a thing, exactly. If we can't make it a positive force, right, ourselves, someone's gonna sterilize it, like the Chinese have. So I think that's what we need to be looking at, is that it's not about that we need to be taking this seriously as kind of, if you care about freedom, if you care about open discourse, if you care about human rights, then we need to make sure that our platforms are upholding those things.
It's like my parents would say, there's too much freedom in the West.
There is kind of, but it's not necessarily freedom. The freedom comes with responsibility, and these platforms, like YouTube, needs to be responsible, not necessarily by censoring, but that algorithm needs to get better and not be giving us Alex Jones every other.
And not flagging every episode of China Uncensored.
Yeah, we have our own issues with the algorithm.
Yeah. So I mean, but and it's not an easy conversation. So it's either going to be we spend a lot of time and effort on the complicated work of managing an open internet, or we do or powerful people, powerful institutions, the Communist Party and the like, will do it for us. And I would prefer more of the kind of internet that we have. So, but that relies on all of us. So that's the message that I have.
Wait, Elliott, there actually is one question I want to ask you about, like, what people can do about internet so it's like saying like we should do something about managing like the extremism or whatever, but like, we're not in charge of YouTube. What can we do about it?
Well, one thing is, you can recognize one thing, I mean, this is like tech literacy is really important. So like just making sure that like you understand how these algorithms work, I think is very, very important. And knowing that when you click on that YouTube video, like there's a reason why that other video showed up, and start to notice these trends. I mean, ultimately, like people just need to be mindful of the kind of content that they're consuming, which sadly it's really hard to expect people to do. But
I mean, they're pushing all of our buttons. It's like, yeah.
But for me, a lot of it is just, before you jump to a conclusion, I've become far more aware. Like, for example, like when I used to really love, like I still like The Daily Show, or like I like Seth Meyers, but I still like every time I listen to him, like I'm not, like I don't really disagree with anything they say. Like I'm not a Trump supporter, that's for sure. But at the same time, like I'm like, well, they clearly have an agenda, and they're, like how. But just thinking to myself, how am I trying to be influenced here? What is the other side of this argument? And I think that being in China has really helped me with that, because I always have to be thinking about, okay, what's a Chinese person going to think about this? What's a foreign journalist going to think about this? Because I seem to be, it's very easy for no matter what I write to get attacked from from all sides.
Well, you're definitely not going to make everybody happy, but it sounds like what you're talking about is just like critical thinking skills.
Yeah,
hey,
exactly.
That gets people pretty riled up.
Thinking about things is controversial.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, exactly. But just thinking about things and just being able to have polite disagreements with people, and to learn how to say, for me it's being in China, where any kind of, it's so easy to get kind of people's nationalist fervor up, to be able to learn how to kind of ask questions of people and be like, okay, well, why do you feel that way? What makes you think that this is like this? Why is that important to you? Just asking questions like that kind of can learn to get past some of this just clear, like, kind of propaganda bullshit, to the point where we're dealing with each other on an interpersonal level.
That's really great.
Yeah, it's something that kind of I've learned. I'm still not perfect at, but I've really learned how to to operate better in that way. But ultimately, really, it has to do with what we demand from the internet platforms, and to say, like, okay, to call out what their algorithms are doing. I listened to Ezra Klein had on his podcast I forgot her name, but she was talking about basically how these algorithms encourage extremism, right? But if people are calling out and writing articles and reporting about how their algorithm, is, pushing people to extremes, right? Then it holds them accountable. and there's more and more pressure for them to change it. Or with Facebook, right? Why did not enough people talked about that Sri Lanka story, right? Because Facebook should have done something about that. Like, that was Facebook's responsibility. And it's not just about Facebook. It's about the entire, liberal world order. So it's not just there has to be some sort of kind of public-private partnership in the way that we kind of view, our internet companies. Although once you start saying public-private partnership, China has a public-private partnership as well. Right. So
it's a complicated issue.
It's a very complicated issue. So, but we have something coming down the, in the very near future, if not already here, that can really disrupt stuff. With the degree to which our algorithms can know us better than we do, or than we know ourselves, and the degree to which the people who control the data can manipulate it, whether they're a government or a corporation, or Russian teenagers. It's a scary thing, and I don't have all the answers, but I think it's something we all need to be aware of.
Well, great, Elliott. That's wonderful final thoughts. Thank you very much for joining us. Is there anywhere else people can learn more about you or read more of your work?
Sure. You can follow me on Twitter at Elliott Zaagman. That's ELLIOTTZAAGMAN. I know that's a lot of double letters, but my parents like letters. You can follow me on Twitter. You can also add me on LinkedIn. And you can read me at Technode. So that's TECHNODE, or Tech in Asia. But let me just give a plug for Technode. Technode is probably the best outlet. I know I'm biased, but if you want to learn more about the Chinese internet, read Technode, because they're very close to the ground. They're in China. They're covering, really the issues that need to be covered, to be honest with you, and that the bigger guys are not covering. And they're also owned and operated by Chinese operators, to have Chinese ownership, and they're doing real journalism, which is becoming more and more of a rarity. So support them, read their content, read their news, give them some attention.
Cool, I'll definitely be checking them out. Well, thank you for joining us on China Unscripted. Thank you again, Elliott. And once again, I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley Zhang.
And I'm Matt Gnezda.
Talk to you next time.